growing concerns about Senator Mitch McConnell's ability to serve following the news of his hospitalization 3 weeks ago.
At last check, the senator was still receiving care. He's already confirmed he would not seek re-election after this current term ends this January.
The law recently changed in Kentucky if the need arises to replace a U.S. senator. And as Wave News anchor Scott Reynolds explains, it now calls for something 4 other states require: a special election.
In 2024, the Kentucky State Legislature voted to fill vacancies like a U.S. Senate seat with only a special election. Prior to that change, a 2021 law did allow the sitting party of the seat that was vacated to pick 3 candidates for the governor to choose from, instead of the governor solely making that decision. The state representative who sponsored the special election only law says it mirrors the intent of the 17th Amendment, that senators be elected by the citizens.
And I don't think politics should be involved. I think the people should elect U.S. senators, and one person should not pick it. Not a Democrat, not a Republican, the people.
Representative Rudy says he pushed for a special election only instead of an appointment after Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich was convicted of trying to sell the Senate seat when Barack Obama became president. But the deadline to pull off a special election in Kentucky is rapidly approaching because candidates need 30 days to apply and have to do so 56 days before the special election. Other requirements have political experts saying the cutoff to call for a special election is August 3rd. Senator McConnell has suffered several physical issues and frozen while speaking twice in the past few years. Representative Rudy is optimistic, though, that McConnell will recover and a special election won't be necessary after he says a colleague recently spoke with the senator.
One of my fellow leaders has had some good conversation with him in the last couple days, and seems like he's improving.
McConnell is retiring from the Senate after serving since 1984. Democrat Charles Booker and Republican Andy Barr are the top candidates on the ballot for the general election in November.